Most cities run on a bunch of quiet assumptions. The trucks keep showing up, the power stays steady, and clean water keeps coming out of the tap. If those assumptions break for weeks or months, some places spiral fast because they're built to consume, not to produce. In this video, we're looking at 8 US. Fortress cities. Not perfect, not magical, and definitely not immune to hardship, but positioned with real advantages like reliable freshwater, nearby food production, multiple energy options, manageable population pressure, and communities that tend to organize under stress. This isn't about action movie survival. It's a practical resilience audit of locations that are more likely to keep functioning when the usual systems don't. Number 1. Kalispell to Whitefish, Montana. In a worst-case long disruption, the first thing that decides who's comfortable and who's scrambling is basic resources. Drinkable water, some kind of local food production, and a way to keep heat and light going when services get unreliable. The Flathead Valley is interesting because it stacks a few of those advantages in the same place. You've got a cold weather water system that mostly runs on mountains doing what mountains do: snowpack, melt, rivers, and a big lake nearby. That matters because mountain-fed water is usually more dependable than places that rely on a single pumped aquifer or a distant canal. On top of that, northwestern Montana has real hydroelectric generation in the region, and hydro is one of the few power sources that can keep producing steadily as long as the water keeps moving. If you're thinking in prepping for beginners terms, then the big win here is that your baseline needs are easier to cover. Water is close, the climate pushes you to take winter seriously, and the area isn't built around constant imports of water and electricity the way many fast-growing cities are. The trade-off is obvious. Winter is not a vibe, it's a job. If your plan is just, "I'll figure it out," cold weather will punish that fast. So if you live here or you're considering it, your beginner prepper priorities are pretty simple. Reliable home heat that doesn't depend on the grid 24/7, a realistic pantry that matches how you actually eat, and a plan for week-long snow and ice disruptions without leaving your house. This is also a place where urban prepping looks different than a mega city. You're not trying to become a lone hero. You're trying to be a steady neighbor in a smaller community. That means getting to know local supply rhythms, local farms, seasonal food, and the kind of basic skills people actually use: simple repairs, safe food storage, and health basics. The risk profile is also part of the honest picture. Wildfire smoke can be a real seasonal issue in parts of the inland Northwest, and housing costs can be high in scenic mountain towns. That doesn't cancel out the fortress idea. It just means your preparedness plan should include clean indoor air during smoky periods and a budget reality check before you commit. Number 2. Rapid City, South Dakota. If you want a city that isn't huge, isn't coastal, and has a mix of terrain and water access, Rapid City is a solid example of middle-sized resilience. It sits right where the Great Plains run into the Black Hills, and that geography matters in a practical way. While hills and forests tend to mean more small watersheds, more creeks, more reservoirs, and more places where water comes from local rainfall and snow, instead of being imported from hundreds of miles away. Rapid City also benefits from being surrounded by working land, ranching, grains, and mixed agriculture. So it's not a place where food is just something that arrives on trucks and disappears in a day. In a long supply chain disruption, regions with nearby producers usually recover faster because they have options: local processing, local distribution, and people who already understand seasonal cycles. For survival prepping for beginners, Rapid City is a good reminder that you're not trying to predict the exact disaster. You're trying to reduce how many things must go perfectly for you to be okay. Here, the basics can be covered with straightforward prepper essentials. Keep your water plan realistic, storage plus a way to make questionable water safe. Keep food simple and storable, and make sure you can handle temperature swings. This is a 4-season area, which means you plan for winter heating and summer storms without pretending either one is rare. Another angle people forget is infrastructure scale. A mid-sized city can still have hospitals, repair services, tradespeople, and regional transportation links, Stuff you actually need if the world gets messy and you're trying to keep your household stable. The downside is that plains and hills regions can get severe weather. Wind, hail, blizzards, and thunderstorms are part of the deal. That's not a reason to write it off. It's a reason to build boring. See practical readiness, backup lighting, weather radio, a way to cook without power, and a home setup that can handle a few days of rough conditions without turning into a crisis. Number 3. Bismarck, North Dakota. A lot of collapse talk focuses on dramatic scenes, but the real divider is usually much more basic: energy and temperature control. Bismarck sits in a state that produces a lot of energy, and that matters because energy isn't just about keeping your phone charged. Energy is heat in winter, refrigeration for food and medicine, and the ability to run pumps, tools, and essential services. North Dakota also has serious agriculture around it: wheat, oilseeds, livestock. So you're in a region that actually produces calories instead of importing nearly everything. Add the Missouri River running right through the area, and you have a stable, obvious water source that doesn't depend on a distant pipeline. For prepping how-to guide thinking, the Bismarck advantage is that the area is built around production, energy and food, rather than pure consumption. That's a big deal in any long disruption. But the trade-off is also very real. Winter there can be brutal. If you're not set up for deep cold, none of the other advantages matter because your daily life becomes a fight against exposure and frozen systems. So for a beginner prepper in a place like this, the priorities are not exotic. You focus on insulation, dependable heat, protecting plumbing, and having enough supplies that you're not forced to travel when roads are dangerous. This is also where emergency preparedness tips get very specific in a safe way. Keep your vehicle ready for winter. Keep a no-power way to stay warm. And don't assume you can always just go buy it later. Bismarck is a fortress city in the sense that it's not overloaded with population, it's not built on imported water, and it's in an energy-producing region. It's not a fortress if someone moves there and ignores the cold. In a serious disruption, winter competence is basically a survival skill, like knowing how to keep water drinkable or food safe. Number 4. Casper, Wyoming. If you zoom out and look at the US as a map of population density, Wyoming stands out because there just aren't that many people spread across a lot of land. Casper is one of the bigger hubs in that state, but it's still small enough that local systems can be more manageable than in massive metro areas. That matters because in a prolonged emergency, the hardest places to stabilize are often the places with the biggest, most stress demand and the least local production. Casper sits in a region associated with energy production and wide-open logistics, and it's surrounded by a culture that tends to be practical about weather and self-sufficiency without needing to make it a personality. Water is the main reality check in a lot of the interior West, and Casper's water story is tied to rivers and reservoirs that are shared, managed, and sometimes strained depending on drought cycles. So the fortress angle here isn't unlimited water. It's manageable population pressure and a region that understands scarce resources. For beginner prepper planning, that translates into a simple rule. In drier climates, your water plan is never optional. You store water, you have a reliable way to make water safe, and you pay attention to local rules and long-term availability. Casper also deals with wind, cold, and big temperature swings. That's not glamorous, but it's predictable. And predictable hazards are easier to prepare for than surprise ones. This is a good city for the kind of preparedness that's boring but effective. 2 weeks of food you actually rotate, basic medical supplies, backup lighting, a way to cook, and a realistic plan for days when roads are bad or services are delayed. People sometimes imagine off-grid survival as some fantasy lifestyle. In reality, what helps most is being able to handle normal life when the support systems get shaky. Casper's advantage is that it's already in a part of the country where people don't assume help arrives instantly. And that mindset tends to produce better community-level resilience. Number 5. Springfield, Missouri. The Ozarks are one of those regions where the water story is a real headline, not an afterthought. The landscape is full of springs, creeks, rivers, and lakes, and a lot of the water comes through limestone and underground channels. In plain language, that means water is often nearby and plentiful. And in a long disruption, nearby and plentiful beats technically available but 200 miles away. Springfield is a mid-sized city that functions like a hub for a wide rural area, which can be an advantage because you're not isolated from services, but you're also close to farms, forests, and smaller communities. In a collapse-style scenario, areas with mixed land use, some urban capability, some rural production, often hold up better than places that are purely urban and purely dependent. This is also a region with a long growing season compared to the northern plains, which matters for food security. It's easier to garden, easier to run small-scale local production, and easier to keep a prepper stockpile from turning into a desperate situation because you can add fresh food more months of the year. The trade-off is that this is storm country. Tornadoes and severe thunderstorms are not theoretical here, so preparedness has to include weather safety. For emergency preparedness for beginners, the Springfield approach looks like this. You plan for power outages, you plan for storms, and you plan for supply disruptions without turning it into a doom hobby. You keep your home ready to ride out a few days. That you keep important documents and supplies organized, and you treat water and food safety as non-negotiable. One more practical point. Abundant water doesn't mean automatically safe water. Agricultural runoff, broken infrastructure, and contamination are real risks anywhere. So, water access is not the same thing as water you can drink today. Beginners do best when they focus on simple, reliable solutions, commercial filters and treatment options used correctly, rather than trying to improvise chemistry. Springfield works as a fortress city because it's in a water-rich region. It has nearby food production, and it's big enough to have useful infrastructure without being so big that it becomes fragile overnight. Number 6. Des Moines, Iowa. If the question is, where does the food come from? Iowa is basically the loudest answer on the map. Des Moines sits in the middle of an agricultural powerhouse, and that gives it a major advantage in any scenario where supply chains are disrupted for weeks or months. It's not that grocery stores magically stay full, it's that the region has the land, the skills, and the production capacity to redirect food locally when higher-level systems fail. That's the difference between scarcity and shortage. Shortages are painful. Scarcity is dangerous. Water is also present in the form of major rivers and watersheds, and Iowa has invested heavily in wind energy, which adds another layer of regional resilience. A city doesn't need to be off-grid to do well in a disruption. It needs redundancy. It's multiple ways to get power, multiple ways to move goods, multiple ways to get food and water. Des Moines has that redundancy vibe more than a lot of flashy places. The downside is that the Midwest has real severe weather, tornadoes, ice storms, flooding in some areas, so a beginner prepper plan here includes storm readiness as a baseline. This is also a place where family preparedness can be very practical because you have space. A lot of people can store supplies without turning their living room into a warehouse. That makes it easier to build a calm, sensible stockpile. Shelf-stable foods you rotate, backup cooking options, basic meds, hygiene supplies, and a little extra for friends or family if things get tight. Des Moines also benefits from being a regional services hub, which matters for recovery. In a long disruption, the areas that bounce back are the ones that can repair, rebuild, and organize. Mechanics, trades, healthcare, logistics. If you live in a place like Des Moines, the prepping hacks that actually work aren't secret tricks, they're habits. Keep your supplies rotated, keep your financial emergency buffer if you can, keep your vehicle maintained, and keep relationships strong. That last part sounds soft, but in every real-world crisis, the people who do best are the ones who aren't isolated. Number 7. Knoxville, Tennessee. Water and energy are a big part of the Knoxville story. The Tennessee River system is huge, and the region has a long history of dams and power generation. In simple terms, that means there's a built-in framework for producing electricity from moving water, managing waterways, and keeping critical services running even when other parts of the grid are stressed. Knoxville also sits in a part of the country with a long growing season and a lot of mixed terrain, valleys, hills, and rural pockets. So food production isn't just somewhere far away, it's nearby, and it's diverse. That diversity matters in a disruption because it reduces single-point failures. If one crop fails, others still produce. If one route is blocked, others exist. Another fortress factor is climate. East Tennessee gets storms, but it's not dealing with coastal hurricanes on the same level as the Gulf and Atlantic coasts, and it's not dealing with the extreme desert water limits of the Southwest. It's not perfect, but it's balanced. For a beginner prepper in Knoxville, the plan can stay grounded. Build home preparedness first, then scale up. That means a solid pantry, a water plan, basic first aid and essential meds management, backup power for small needs, and a way to stay informed when the internet is spotty. It also means thinking about flooding in low-lying areas and power outage patterns after storms. Knoxville's bigger advantage is that it's a functional city with surrounding rural capacity. That combination is what you want if you're thinking long-term. Access to healthcare and repairs, plus access to local producers and smaller communities. And because this is a region with strong local networks, churches, volunteer groups, community organizations, there's a higher chance that people coordinate instead of panic when things get unstable. You can't buy that with gear. You build it by showing up, being reliable, and not waiting until day zero to introduce yourself to your neighbors. Number 8, Duluth, Minnesota. If you're thinking about the long game, freshwater is one of the few resources that doesn't get easier to replace when systems fail. Duluth sits on Lake Superior, which is basically the definition of a lot of fresh water in one place. That doesn't mean you just scoop it and drink it without thinking, but it does mean you're not living in a city where water has to be pumped uphill from far away or imported through fragile infrastructure. Duluth also has a natural climate advantage that people don't always appreciate. Cooler summers reduce heat stress, and in many disruption scenarios, extreme heat becomes one of the fastest ways for cities to break down, especially places that rely on constant air conditioning. The trade-off is winter, and winter in Duluth is serious. Snow, ice, wind, and long cold stretches mean your preparedness plan has to treat heating, insulation, and safe travel as core requirements. But here's the difference. Cold is hard, but it's predictable. You can prepare for it with straightforward home readiness and the right routines, and a lot of the local culture already does. Duluth also benefits from being a port city on the Great Lakes system, and ports matter because they're alternative transport routes. When highways are stressed or fuel is limited, waterways can still move bulk goods more efficiently than trucks. In a major disruption, that kind of infrastructure flexibility is a quiet advantage. For emergency preparedness, Duluth is a strong beginner prepper city because the priorities are clear. Plan for winter outages, keep a stable pantry, store water, and make sure you can stay warm safely without depending on perfect conditions. This is also a city where community readiness can be strong because harsh winters force people into a practical mindset. When you live somewhere that punishes denial every year, you get less of the "it can't happen here" attitude. Duluth won't be comfortable for everyone, and not everyone wants that climate. But if the question is, which places keep working when others struggle? Abundant freshwater, manageable scale, and a population that respects the weather are a pretty strong combination.